I have a big problem. I just didn't know how much I did know how much I had because I can see it, and I need to be strict with myself. Okay. I'm just looking at the list, it's just so stressful. My name is Hannah and I am a serial yarn buyer. I buy quicker than I knit, and they are two very different hobbies. Go to any yarn store, and I've had this conversation multiple times with multiple yarn store owners. Buying is a very different hobby to knitting, but there are lots of reasons why a bit of retail therapy in the knitting world is helpful. Yarn doesn't have any calories, it doesn't go off. These are all the things I tell myself when I'm just handing over my card. It's squishy, it's tactile, it's sensory, it smells good, it looks good, it feels good. You know what I'm talking about. If you're a fibre artist, then you know what I'm talking about. Luckily for me, I have a past self that was trying to regain some control after a hard labour and having a baby, and thought I'm going to organise all of my stash on Ravelry, because I knew that my stash would have to go up in a loft at some point because it could not just stay down here. So I told myself I am not going to buy any more yarn this year. I'm trying to be quite strict with myself, and since seeing the numbers, I need to be strict with myself. Although I just know that future me is going to buy stuff, and if we go away for a couple of days, I might want a souvenir. That's one of the things I do, is buy a little souvenir in a yarn shop. You've got to check out your local yarn stores, right, everywhere you go. If there's a good deal that comes through, I don't know. I'm addicted to yarn. So I'm putting it in a video. I've written it down, it exists digitally. I've exported my Ravelry stash, which you can do really easily onto Excel, and then you can total up the columns using AutoSum. I googled this. I'm taking this very seriously, okay? I'm an overachiever by trade, and this is going to be my challenge for 2024. By exporting said document, I have totaled up how much yarn I have. Just looking at the list, it's just so stressful. Some of it doesn't even have quantities of like yardage or weight necessarily. Definitely not yardage, because there might be like random mystery skeins that I've bought from charity shops, or it might be that some of the really old vintagey yarn don't have a meterage or a yardage on them, so it might just be like the weight of them. I have used scales, like been very intense about this, and used scales and made sure that I've weighed particular balls, so I should have the weight pretty close. I have 43,937 grams of yarn, which is the equivalent, if I had 50 gram balls, everything was 50 grams, that would be 879 balls of yarn. 879. Okay. I've also worked out the length of these, not including the ones I don't know the length of. So this is obviously going to be bigger because there's quite a few that I don't know the length of. I have minimum 113 kilometres of yarn, which is 70 miles. I have 70 miles of yarn, which I've then tracked and decided that to get from Birmingham, where I live, to 70 miles away, that is to Bristol or Manchester or Luton Airport or the Brecon Beacons. I could get there by tying all my yarn together and walking, or in the car, and just get all the way there, which is quite a concern, isn't it, really? Side note, I should mention that this does not include all my whips. There's a whole pile of whips down there that I'm looking at, and it's staring at me, and I'm trying not to make eye contact with. And there are 18 whips down there, which include a blanket that needs to be sewed up, hoodies, jumpers, baby hats, a summer top. I could go on, socks, I could go on and on. right? All different types of things. So I'm not even including the yarn that is already kind of set aside to finish projects, not products. Which I think it's going to be closer to like 100 miles of yarn if I counted all that. But we're not going to talk about that right now. We're not going to talk about it. So this is going to be my plan. I'm going to knit a little bit and I'm going to talk through a few points I'm going to make myself try and stick to, some rules for 2024 and how to bust this stash. I was knitting on this last night and we was watching The Traitors on BBC and it was all getting very tense, so I'm pretty sure I probably made a mistake. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about with my stash busting project is getting the in and out balance. I haven't had that for a long time, so this is why I'm kind of focusing on just working on my output as opposed to my input for my hoard of stuff for a while, to make sure that I can kind of regain some balance over this hobby and this investment. I should see yarn as an investment, right? It's like, it would be just like a painter buying loads of oil paint and then not using any of it, just buying more and more and more. That's just silly. So I need to use it as an opportunity to enjoy my investment. When I look at my stash, and I'm sure this is the same for everybody, there are eras of interest. And what I mean by that is when I started knitting and when I started buying yarn, again, two separate hobbies. Just be very impressed with the fact I just keep some yarn in sandwich bags. Super professional. When I started knitting, I had a very different type of yarn I was interested in working with and buying, and that was of course super chunky and chunky yarn, and I wasn't too bothered at the beginning about fibre content. I used to use much more acrylic mixes, but also really was driven by price. This was during the 2020 lockdown was when I really started buying a lot of yarn. Me and my mum just used to phone each other every, you know, it was when we couldn't leave the house. It was like real strict lockdown in the UK and the world. So me and my mum would phone each other every day and we would discuss the different yarn sales that we were getting through our emails, and I just bought loads of yarn. I bought a lot of like sweater quantities of yarn. So I have some of that left over, which I'm not even sure I'm going to use. That might end up being something that I donate or sell or whatever, but it's fine for now. I'm not too worried about it. At this point, I think there will be some things that I want to sell on or donate, but I want to just kind of see how the journey of like stash busting like works for me before I just make those decisions, because I'd hate to regret getting rid of something. Hoarder tendencies there. Then I had an era of kind of buying very fancy fingering 4-ply lace weight yarns, because I followed a lot of independent dyers on Instagram, because we went to a couple of yarn festivals and different independent stores that had some, and I did fine art at uni. I'm an art teacher. I love a gradiented colourway. I love a splatter. I love a vibrancy mixed with some like pastel shades. So I had that era of buying a lot of like independent single skeins of yarn. So I have sweater quantities, I have single skeins, I have souvenirs that kind of get mixed in with those single skeins as well. Then when I found out I was pregnant, I bought a lot of baby friendly yarn. So again, I've kind of got some single skeins of acrylic, or at least like easy to wash, easy to care for yarns. And then I've been driven back to kind of a mixture of all those things, but more so maybe in the last few months, like a bit more of a classier yarn, should we say, with kind of interesting textures, but definitely like natural and animal fibre content. So I love an alpaca yarn. I've always loved like a wool yarn. I'm very interested in kind of keeping that wool industry alive, especially in the UK. So I love like a West Yorkshire Spinners. I love drops. I love Serda. I've got some Stylecraft, quite a lot of Stylecraft. Katia. I don't mind. I'll buy from anyone. I'll buy from anywhere. So yeah, I have a real splattering of different yarns. I'm not somebody who's like, I only work with acrylic, or I only work with natural, or I only work with vegan yarns. I just work with anything that I like the look of in the store, and then I end up bringing it home and being like, what is this supposed to go with? I don't know what this is supposed to look like. Yeah. One thing that has really helped me to kind of get to know my stash, get to know the characters that I've got to play with, I guess, is to do some swatches. And that's been something that I've enjoyed really doing in the last part of last year, because I was able to not have to use my brain very much when you're tired, and just do a little 10 by 10 square to kind of get to know with what the fabric will look like once you've knitted it up. So whether that's changing needle size, different stitch patterns, different yarns together, if I don't have enough of one to create a whole like garment for me. So I've done some Franken swatches of different types of yarns together, and that's really helped me to decide what patterns I could then do moving forward. I made a bit of a faux pas in my third episode where I said I wasn't going to buy any more patterns, and I was going to work from a lot of free patterns, which in some cases might be true. I might be working from free patterns sometimes, because that's going to help me not spend lots of money, and that's part of the reason I've kind of given myself some restrictions this year. But I think it's too much of a restriction to only use free patterns and just have it as that, as a blanket rule, because there are incredible independent designers out there with a lot of patterns that I love that are being brought out all the time. And if I say I'm not going to buy any new patterns, one, I'm not supporting fellow knitters and designers, but also I'm just restricting myself to what I want to make, and I think that's a silly idea. And patterns are cheap compared to how much work goes into them, so I want to continue to support independent designers out there. And somebody put in a comment in my episode 3, which is a very good point. They're usually like checked and pattern tested and like verified as being accurate, so much more than you know, bigger brands and their patterns they bring out. I bought some yarn from Catcher and I looked at the based on a pattern. First time I've really done that, and I downloaded the pattern the other day. It is so sparse in its information. There's 3 different languages involved in like a 5-page document. It's a really small amount of instructions, and I'm just not buying that it's been checked. It doesn't have, they don't change needle sizes after the rib. The increases are kind of like, you need to now increase a total of so and so times over so and so rows. It's not very thorough. So in a nutshell, I'm sticking with the indies. I'm going to go and buy some more independent designers too. I should make that as a point. That is one of the rules, I guess. I am somebody that does not have the pattern in mind when I buy yarn, because it might be a bargain or it's something that I've never really seen before. So I think, oh, this is an opportunity to buy something. And I don't want to necessarily buy a whole sweater's quantity of something that's unknown to me. So I'll buy one little skein and then like play around with that, or it just sits in my stash by the sounds of it. That's my idea, is to make something with it. There's only so many small shawls you can make, or hats, right? So instead I have lots of random skeins. So it's been helpful to get to know the yarns that I have, is to create these little swatches and see how they work together as well, you know, and if they are doable as a kind of a scrappy stash busting project. I said this earlier, but I'm really driven by texture, I'm really driven by colour, and I think that's something that's going to make especially scrappier projects where I'm having to use a lot of single skeins together to kind of make a whole garment, if I'm making things myself, that is. And also for Annalise, because she's big enough now to, you know, not be able to get like one project out of 100 grams. I think I'm going to really have to make more of the texture and like kind of, you know, be happy with, which I think I will be, the fact that the texture is part of the garment and part of like the interest of that particular thing that I'm working on. So my plan is to shop my stash instead. And I thought, like, should I set a challenge where I, you know, kind of play a bit of bingo, or do it kind of blind and just pick something out and then be like, oh, I'm going to work with this now. I don't think that's going to work for me. I think I'm too much of a control freak. I think I need to know what my projects are going to be, what my plans are going to be. I would love to get through some of these whips as well and really make a decision on them, because they are taking up like a good amount of space in this room. There's no point to them at the moment, but I know that if I made a challenge to kind of like do all my whips first, that's not going to help me with my stash. And also I I've fallen out of love with a few of them, so I think I'm going to have a new project on the go at the same time. I should note that I also was preparing for this in the autumn to winter time and knew that I was going to give myself a no buy year in 2024, and therefore I bought loads of I bought loads of yarn in the sales to kind of buffer that. I didn't buy a whole year's worth, but I bought like a good amount of yarn, but with plans of what to do with them. So yeah, I've got a whole lot down here that I'm gonna have to put in the loft. If any of you out there that has like a hoard of yarn, then you're not alone. And if you don't know what to do with it, you're also not alone. And if you're a serial single skein buyer, you're not alone. And if you used to knit a lot more than you do now, definitely not alone. I've got to be kind to myself during this process as well and not get too mad when I don't hit my own high expectations, because I do set very high expectations for myself and then they're like impossible to reach, and then I get really down on myself. So I'm not going to be able to knit as much as I used to because of having Annalise. So I have to knit at night. I have to find those pockets of time to do so. I used to commute by public transport so I could knit during that time. That doesn't happen anymore. So I don't get that knitting time either. So it's going to look different to the way it has ever before, which is fine. I've come to terms with that. 70 miles of yarn, guys. That's what I've got to work through. I wonder how much I'll get done in the year. I do wonder. I think it'll be interesting to find out, right, to compare this time next year to see. What am I doing now? Am I doing a different row? Different yarn? So, in summary, swatch before you start. That's going to help me. Play with different textures, colours and yarn weights too. I want to have multiple projects on at the same time so that I can dip in and out of different things depending on what I'm doing that day. If I need to concentrate on something a little bit more, it's more of a complicated pattern, then I need to have a much more simple pattern and project to work on in those moments where I'm half playing, I'm half cooking, I'm in the back of the car, whatever. Think about using those single skeins as single skein projects, as little accessories, or putting them in with larger quantities of other yarns to make larger garments. And don't be too hard on yourself if you don't hit the high expectations that you have. This is me talking to myself, by the way. And don't be too strict on yourself. If you see some yarn that you love, you don't have to not buy it. Just be aware of the fact that you have 70 miles of yarn above you at all times. I can't believe it. I better get knitting, right? You'd think I'd be able to like organise my bullet points, wouldn't you? Number 6 is making each knit count. Very Jack Dawson of me there. Because I only have a limited capacity and limited time to work on things, don't work on projects or start projects for the sake of just using the stash up. Find the right project for the right yarn and make each of them count so that you're going to make things that you want to wear and that you want to use. That's really important. It's not just about the yarn, it's not just about the process. It should also be about the outcome. I'm really excited about this year. I'm really excited about delving into the stash, delving into different patterns, and I just can't wait to see what I create during this year. I'm really excited about it. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to continue joining me in this journey, this crazy challenge I'm setting myself, then please like and subscribe. I hope you're having a lovely day, and see you soon. Bye.